Hey everyone, Omogonix here and welcome back to a brand new Godot tutorial here on the channel. In today's video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make a settings menu for your Godot game. I've already taught you guys how to make a settings menu before in a previous video of mine that's part of my Godot horror game tutorial series. However, if you're someone who's not interested in that series, or if you just prefer a standalone tutorial, hopefully this tutorial is just right for you. Here on the screen you will see a list of settings I'll be showing you guys how to add today. If you do enjoy or do find this tutorial helpful, be sure to like, comment and subscribe for more. Also consider supporting me on Ko-Fi, maybe even join one of the memberships I have on there, and consider checking out my games on itch.io too. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into this tutorial. Alright, so here I am in my Godot 4.4 tutorial project. So yeah, if you're interested in knowing what version of Godot I'm using for this tutorial, I am using Godot 4.4. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by creating a new scene. It's going to be a user interface scene, of course, and I'm going to rename the new parent node here to settings. So I'm just going to call this settings. And now let's get started. So first off, I'm going to add a background for this settings menu. So I'm going to go right click onto my parent node here, go add child node, and then we're going to add a color rect. So what a color rect is it's, well, you know, just a color. It's basically just a colored square that you can move around and scale. So I think I'm going to have this cover up maybe like a quarter of my screen, and the reason as to why I want this color rect to cover up a quarter of my screen is because I still want to have some of the scene be visible when we are changing up the settings stuff. So now I'm going to change the color of this color rect to black, or maybe even something like a dark red. You guys can do whatever color you want it to, of course, it doesn't really matter. And now that we've got our background added in, now let's add in some text. So I'm going to go right click onto my parent node here, go add child node, and now I'm going to add a rich text label. So a rich text label is just some text, and what this text is going to say here is visuals, because the first lot of settings we're going to be adding are going to be our visual settings. And so now I'm going to go change the font size of the text. So to do that, what you do is you just make sure you have your text selected in the hierarchy, go down to theme overrides, font sizes, and then you can change your font size of your text. I think I'm going to set the font size of the text here to 30 for now, or maybe even 40. Yeah, that seems alright. And then we're just going to move it over a bit like that, and there we go. So now we have some text which indicates our visual settings. So now I'm going to go duplicate this text, and then I'm going to move it down. And what this text here is going to say is 3D scaling, because the first setting which we're going to be adding is the 3D scaling setting. And if you don't know what 3D scaling is, I will show you guys quickly. So I'm just turning down the font size of this text right now. Also, do be sure to press Ctrl S as you are working on your scene as well, so you do save it and make sure that if your project crashes you don't lose any of your progress. So do make sure to save your settings menu from time to time. I'm just going to save it into my my scenes folder here. So let me just quickly show you guys what the 3D scaling setting does. So if I was to go into my 3D scene here, for example, right, and then I went into my project settings, and if you search up scaling in the project settings, you'll then come across this tab here under the rendering section called Scaling 3D. And then you'll find this slider here for the scale. So if I change the scale and I make it lower, for example, as you can see, it now makes the game scene lower quality. So yeah, the 3D scaling basically changes the 3D resolution of your game. So by default this is set to 1.0, but you can set this lower or higher if you want to, of course. So that's the 3D scaling setting. So now let's go back into the settings menu, and now let's go add a slider for this 3D scaling setting. So I'm going to go click onto my parent node here, right click, add child node, and now I'm going to go add a H slider. So what a H slider is it's a horizontal slider. So I'm just going to go add this in, and then I'm just going to scale it out, just like that. And then we can just move it underneath the 3D scaling text, and boom, there we go. So now with the min value of this slider, so we have the min value and the max value. So the min value obviously determines what the minimum value of the slider is going to be, and then the maximum value determines what the maximum value of the slider is going to be, obviously. So with the 3D scaling setting, The lowest option we can set it to is 0.25. So what I'm going to do for the min value of the slider here is I'm going to enter in 0.25 because that is going to be the minimum value of the slider. And then for the max value, I'm going to set this to 1 since I want that to be the maximum value of which we can set the 3D scaling to. And the default value of this slider I am going to set to 1 as well. But of course you can have your default value be whatever you want it to be. Another important thing as well is since we're dealing with floats here, it is important that our step value does not equal to 1, so I recommend making this equal to something like 0, or maybe even something like 0.05, something like that, or even just 0.1, something which is a float value. So what the step value determines is basically how much the slider can change. So if you have the step value set to 0.1 for example, right? When we change the slider value, so let me just quickly change this to 0.1. So when I change this value here, as you can see, it basically changes the value at a step value of 0.1. So when I'm dragging down here, it goes from 0.75 to 0.65 to 0.55. So basically it's just changing the slider value by 0.1 every time. But if I set this to 0.05, when I change the slider value here, as you can see, it's now going down and up by 0.05. And if we just set the step value straight to 0, now it just changes to whatever. There is no specific step that it's trying to take. Hopefully I did explain that correctly. Hopefully you guys do understand what the step value does. Basically it just determines how much the value of the slider can actually change. And now I'm going to rename this H slider here in my hierarchy to just scaling slider, or just scaling I could call it to. And that there is pretty much the 3D scaling stuff all set up there. So next up I'm now going to add a setting for anti-aliasing. So if you've played many video games before and you've checked out the settings menu of many games, you would most likely know what anti-aliasing is. So let's just go duplicate the text here that I have for the 3D scaling. And now I'm going to move it down just like that. And then I'm going to enter in anti-aliasing also, so then I can actually fit more settings into this menu. I am actually going to scale down the text of some of the things we have here. Alright, so I just scaled down the text. Now we'll be able to fit more onto this settings menu. So for the anti-aliasing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click onto my parent node here, go add child node, and this time I'm going to add an option button. So what an option button is it basically just gives us a list of options to choose between. So obviously Godot has a bunch of different anti-aliasing options, so if we actually go into our project settings here and then we search up anti-aliasing, here under the rendering section you will find the anti-aliasing tab, and then you will find the different stuff that we can set here for the anti-aliasing. So Godot has MSAA, which is multi-sampling anti-aliasing. And then it also has screen space AA, which allows you to use FXAA. And then we also even have temporal anti-aliasing here as well. So if you're someone who doesn't really know too much about anti-aliasing, I will show you guys how it works. So if you pay attention to the scene here, right? I don't know if you guys can tell, but there are a bit of pixelated jagged edges on the rectangles we have here. So if I was to change the MSAA setting, for example, and I was to set this to 8 times, now as you can probably tell, the jagged edges on the rectangles are now gone, but if I set it back to normal, now they're back. I will probably zoom in on the screen so you guys can see it a bit better in case you can't tell, but basically anti-aliasing just makes sure that the jagged edges on objects are less apparent, and it basically just smoothens things out. So with our anti-aliasing option button here, if we go into the item section, so with your option button selected, right, if you go into the inspector menu and then you look to the right here, as you can see we have this items tab. If we click onto this, this is where we can add new elements to our option button. So the first one I'm going to add is going to be for no anti-aliasing. So in the text here for this first item, I'm just going to enter in none, since I don't want there to be any anti-aliasing for the first option. And then for the second option, I'm now going to add FXAA. And then for the third, I'm then going to do TAA for the third option. And then we're going to be doing a few MSAA related options. So we're going to be doing MSAA 2 times, and then MSAA 4 times, and then MSAA 8 times. And there we go. So we have, I think, 5 different settings here for our anti-aliasing. So we have none, FXAA, TAA, MSAA 2 times, MSAA 4 times, and then MSAA 8 times. So they're going to be the different anti-aliasing options we're going to be changing between. Now by default, I'm going to make this equal to none. So to set a default option for your anti-aliasing, if you go up to the top of your option button inspector menu, you can see that it says selected, and by default this will be set to -1. However, you can change this to whatever you want to. So if I was to change it to 0, as you can see now on the option button, it displays none, since none is 0 on my option button. And then if I was to go up to 1, it then changes to FXAA, then TAA, MSAA, and yeah, so on and so forth. So yeah, by default I'm going to have this set to none, but you can have yours set to what you want to by default, of course. So that there is going to be our anti-aliasing option. I'm also going to change the option button name here to just AA, and that's going to be short for anti-aliasing, just so then we remember what this is for. So next up I'm going to be adding a setting for VSync. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate my text here, move it down, and then I'm going to rename this from anti-aliasing to VSync. So this setting is going to be for our VSync. So if you don't know what VSync is, basically it caps your game's frame rate to whatever your monitor refresh rate is. So if your monitor, your display has a refresh rate of 60 Hz, for example, that means that if you have VSync on, the max frame rate you'll be able to get is 60 frames per second. VSync also helps stop screen tearing, so if you want to have that as an option for your game, you can. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select my option button here for the anti-aliasing, then I'm just going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to move it down below the VSync option here. There we go. And so with the items in this option button for the VSync, I'm going to get rid of them all, and I'm going to add 2 new ones. So the 2 elements we're going to be having are off and on. So I'm going to go add an element, and then in the text here I'm going to enter off, and then I'm going to add a new element and then enter in on here. And by default I want this to be on, so I'm going to change the selected value to 1, and now as you can see our VSync option is set to on. I'm just going to shrink this down a bit, there we go. So now we have 3 different settings added in for the 3D scaling, anti-aliasing, and VSync. Before we do continue on, I'm just going to change the option button name here for our VSync option button to VSync instead of AA2, and there we go. So now the next setting we're going to be adding has to do with the window mode. So I'm going to go copy my text here, and I'm just going to drag it down here, and then I'm going to enter in window mode. So basically what the window mode setting is going to determine is what window mode we have set for our game. So the different options that are in Godot include windowed, full screen, exclusive full screen. So now I'm going to select my my option button for the VSync, Ctrl D to duplicate, move it underneath the window mode, and then we're going to enter in our options for the window mode. So in the items here, I'm going to get rid of them, and then I'm going to go add a new one, and this will be called windowed. And then I'm going to add another new element. This will be called full screen, and this is what our default option is going to be set to as well. And then lastly, we're going to have exclusive full screen. So if you don't know what the difference between full screen and exclusive full screen in Godot is, basically full screen has like a tiny little bit of a border around it, and the color of the border depends on the default clear color you have set for your project in Godot. And an exclusive full screen basically has no tiny border around it at all. It basically just takes up your entire screen completely. If you go into your project settings and then you search up window, and then you go into the window tab under the display section here you will actually see the setting for setting your window mode. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of these different options, so windowed, minimized, maximized, full screen, and exclusive full screen. In this tutorial, we're going to be adding in the windowed, full screen, and exclusive full screen options for our game. So yeah, that's what the window mode does. It basically just will allow us to change the mode of which we have our game's window in. Alright, so the next setting we're going to be adding has to do with the frame rate cap, since I do feel like it is a good idea to add an FPS cap to your games. So I'm just going to go duplicate my text, move it down here, and then I'm going to call this FPS cap. So I think you guys all know what an FPS cap is. It basically just determines the maximum frame rate of your game. So for this game I'm going to have a few options. We're going to have 30 FPS, 60 FPS and uncapped. So I'm just going to go duplicate my option button here, move it down, just like that. Also I might even have to make the text and stuff here smaller again. Oh, also I forgot to change the window mode option button to be called just window mode in the hierarchy. And then with the FPS cap we can just call that FPS cap. Alright, so now let's go change the items for the FPS cap option. So I'm just going to get rid of these here. Then we're going to go add a new element. This will be called 30 FPS. And then we're going to have 60 FPS. Oh. And then we're going to have uncapped. So by default the game will be set to uncapped. So I'm going to change the selected value here to 2. And there we go. So yeah, basically this option, as I mentioned before, will determine the maximum frame rate of which our game will be able to run at. Alright, so I've just scaled down everything. I've scaled down the text and the option buttons and stuff just to make some more room on our settings menu here. By the way, in case I didn't show how to change the font size of option buttons earlier, you can just go down into the theme overrides, just like with regular text, go down the font size, and then you can change the font size of your option button text here. So the next setting we're going to be adding has to do with the shadow filter quality. So pretty self-explanatory. Basically the shadow filter quality determines, well, the quality of the shadow filter. I will actually show you guys what that does quickly. So here in my 3D scene, pay attention to the shadows. So if we go to project settings and then else to search up shadows, and then we go into lights and shadows. So with the directional shadow option, right, if I was to change the soft shadow filter quality to say soft ultra for example, now I don't know if you guys could tell just then, but the shadow filter quality there just changed. So pay attention to the shadow here. So I'm going to change it back to the regular option and boom, so as you can see it changes. I can also set this to hard, which is the fastest option, and now the shadows look more harder and look less smooth. So yeah. So the difference between the directional shadow and the positional shadow is that the directional shadow has to do with the sunlight, and positional shadow has to do with regular lights like omni lights and spotlights, things that aren't the sunlight. So let's go add an option for that now. So I'm going to go duplicate my text here once again, then I'm going to move it down just like that. And I'm going to call this shadow filter quality. And I'm going to select the option button here, duplicate it, and then move it down. And then I'm going to change up the item names here, so I'm going to set them to hard. And then we're going to have soft very low, and then soft low, which I think was going to be my, my default option. And then we're going to have soft medium, soft high, and soft ultra. So the reason as to why I'm adding so many options for the shadow filter quality here is because if we actually check the shadow filter quality in the project settings, it actually contains all of what I've just added to the option button. So I want us to be able to select between all these options here. And so yeah, by default I'm going to keep this set to soft low, since that is the default quality level in Godot for the shadows. Also, I'm just going to rename the shadow option button in the hierarchy to just shadow quality, just like that. Alright, so that there is some regular visual stuff to do with just the engine itself. But now, I'm actually going to be adding in some options to do with the world environment effects. So, if you don't know what I mean by that, let's actually go into my 3D scene so I can show you guys what I mean. So whenever you're making a 3D game in Godot, the world environment is obviously an important part of that. So if I was to select the world environment node in my scene, and then go to my inspector menu, and then select onto where it says environment here, as you can see, we now have all these options. So if you know a thing or two about video games, you'd most likely know what some of these options here mean, like SSAO. This is one of the most common types of post-processing effects in video games. As you can see, it basically creates these darker highlights. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be adding in some settings to do with some of the effects here, so we can actually change those. So what effects I'm going to be adding in settings for here today in this tutorial, I'm going to be adding in a setting for SSAO, SSIL, SDFGI, glow, volumetric fog, and then the color adjustments as well. I've actually got a bit of a color adjustment thingy set up here. As you can see, when I enable and re-enable this, it sort of gives off a bit of a yellow filter because I added that in for the purpose of this tutorial. So yeah, they're the settings which I'm going to be showing you guys how to add today. If you want to add anything else like SSR or tone mapping into your settings, you guys can teach yourselves that. I'll give you guys a bit of a challenge there. So the first setting I'm going to be adding has to do with SSAO. Now in order to save some room here on my settings menu, I'm actually going to start moving over my, my world environment visual settings over to the right here. So first off, I'm going to duplicate my 3D scaling text, and then I'm just going to move it over here just like that, and I'm going to call this SSAO since this is going to be for the SSAO setting. And then I'm going to get an option button, going to duplicate that and then move that underneath SSAO. And then for the two items here, we're just going to be entering off and on just like that, and by default I want this to be set to on. So yeah, so the next setting I'm going to be adding is for SSIL, and by the way, if you don't know what SSAO and SSIL mean, basically SSAO means screen space ambient occlusion, and then SSIL means screen space indirect lighting. You guys can learn more about those effects if you want to. So now I'm going to duplicate my option button again, move it down here, and we don't need to change anything here. The items can just stay as off and on. Also, I need to change the SSAO button name to SSAO, and then the SSIL one to SSIL. There we go. So now we're going to be adding in a setting for SDFGI. So SDFGI, in case you don't know, is a form of global illumination. Alright, so I'm going to duplicate my SSAO text here, and I'm just going to move it over to the right, just like that. And I'm just going to call this SDFGI. So SDFGI stands for Sign Distance Field Global Illumination. As I mentioned before, it's a form of global illumination. So now I'm just duplicating my button over here, and we can just keep the options as off and on. No need to change anything here. And then I'm going to duplicate my SDFGI text, move it down, and then this is going to be the glow option. So glow basically determines how glowy the scene is, you know, it's sort of like bloom. And I'm just going to get the option button here and then just move it over, just like that. And then of course I need to rename these buttons in the hierarchy, SDFGI and glow, there we go. And now we're going to add a setting for the volumetric fog. So I'm just going to duplicate my SSIL text, move this down here, volumetric fog. And then we can just copy this button, paste it down here. And then lastly, I'm going to do the color adjustments. So I'm just going to call this color adjustments. And then we're going to move this down here. And boom, just like that. So yeah, they're all the visual settings that I'm going to be showing you guys how to do today. Again, if there's anything else that you want to do, like to do with the tone mapping from the world environment or something like that, you guys can teach yourselves how to do that, because this is what I'm going to be bothered to show you guys how to do today. However, just because we're done with adding in the visual settings here, that doesn't mean we're not going to be adding any other kinds of settings. We are also going to be doing audio settings as well. So I'm going to copy the text here, so I'm just going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it, and then move it down here. And then I'm going to call this audio, since this is going to be the subheading for the audio settings. So the only audio setting I'm going to be adding today will be to do with the master volume, which basically means, you know, all the game's volume, including the sound effects and music as well. However, if you guys want to add a sound effects and music volume slider, you guys can add them yourselves, because with the method that I'm going to be showing how to add for the master volume today, it's going to be very easy for you guys to do your own sound effects and music volume slider settings as well, so don't worry. So I'm just going to copy my shadow filter quality text here, and then just paste it down here, and I'm just going to call this master volume. And then I'm going to grab my slider for the 3D scaling, and then I'm just going to go duplicate that, and then move that down here. By the way, sorry to go off topic, but I just realized that I need to rename the volumetric fog option button to volumetric fog, because it's called SSIL2. Oh, accidentally spelled that wrong. And then this color adjustments one here to color adjustments, just so then we know what they are. It's not like you need to rename them, but you know, I like to anyway, just so then I know exactly what they are in the hierarchy. So with the master volume slider, I am going to change the min value to 0 because, you know, I want the player to be able to mute the audio if they want to as well. And with the step value, 0.05 is fine. And then I'm going to rename the slider here to master volume in the hierarchy. And there we go. So the last setting which I'm going to be adding today, before we do get on to doing the scripting for the settings, because don't forget we still need to do scripting for the settings. It's not like just by simply adding these in here that they're just then going to magically work. We still need to do the scripting for them. So the last setting which I'm going to be doing today is going to be a gameplay related setting. So I'm just going to copy the subheading, paste it down here, then I'm going to call this gameplay. Oh, and what this is going to be for is this is going to be for our FOV. So I'm going to copy the text and move it down here, and I'm just going to call this FOV. So the FOV, in case you don't know, well, I mean, most of you would most likely know what FOV is already. But so see here with this camera preview I have set up. So as you can see in the inspector menu, we have a slider for FOV, and when you change this, it basically determines like how zoomed in your camera is basically. So yeah, that's the setting which we're going to be doing today, since that is a common setting in games as well. So I'm just going to grab my master volume slider, press Ctrl-D to duplicate it, and then move it down here, just like that, and boom. So with my min value, I think I'm going to probably set this to something like 50, and then for the max value, we could have this set to like maybe 120. And then for the step value, I'm going to set this to 1 since I want this to change by a value of 1. And then for the default value of the slider, I'm going to set this to 75 since that is the default FOV of the camera in my 3D scene. So yeah, since we have the step value set to 1 now, when I change the value of the slider here, as you can see, it changes by 1. So I'm using my mouse right now to just drag down the volume. As you can see, it changes by 1 now, by 1.0 because of what we have the step value set to. So yeah. And then of course, I am going to rename this to FOV, just like that. Alright, so now we have our settings menu basically done. So now we need to get to doing the scripting, since we still need to script all this too. And another important thing to mention before we do get onto the scripting is to make sure that all of your interactables, so that means your sliders and your option buttons, make sure in your hierarchy that they are below the texts. And the reason as to why is because whatever is higher up on the hierarchy is going to be in the background. So if I was to move this color rect all the way down here, for example, right? As you can see, you can't see anything now, since that means it is now out the front of everything in your UI. So basically whatever is at the very top, that means that it is going to be behind everything else. So do make sure that your texts are behind your interactables, and the reason as to why is because, you know, otherwise you wouldn't be able to select your interactables if the texts are above them. Like, you see this little orange box here, right? So this basically determines like the area of that, you know, UI element. So with this visuals text here, if I was to have this move down here, and then, you know, the rich text label was to be below the scaling slider on the hierarchy, we wouldn't even be able to select the scaling slider anymore. So yeah, one good way to combat that as well, if you do end up ever having text below something on a hierarchy, is you can just make sure that this boundary box here is as small as you possibly can make it without causing that scrolling bar there to happen. So yeah, that's one way to make sure of it, but the best way to make sure of it, to make sure that you can always interact with your interactables, is to make sure that they are below everything else on the hierarchy that isn't an interactable, like a bit of text or a background or something like that. So anyways, with all that out of the way, let's now actually get to doing the scripting now. So select your parent node of your settings menu, and then go to where it says script empty on the inspector, new script, and then I'm going to go select the folder icon here to then go into my scripts folder and then save my settings.gd script, and then we can go create, and boom, so now we are ready to get started. So first off, I'm going to be adding a setting for the 3D scaling. So I'm going to get rid of the basic functions here, and we're going to go func scaling 3D. And you can of course call this function whatever you want to, but I'm just calling it scaling 3D, so then I know exactly what this setting is for. And then in the parentheses here, we're going to be entering value, since that is going to be the value of the slider. And then we do the 2 dots and indent. So what we do here is we do get underscore viewport, parentheses, and then dot scaling 3D scale, and then this will equal to value. So basically what we do for this setting is we grab the viewport, so that means, you know, what the player is looking through in the game, and then we grab the scaling 3D scale of the viewport, and then we scale it to the value of what our slider is going to be set to. Now before we do continue on with the other settings, one thing which I forgot to do, which I should have probably done first, is I want to add a function to save the settings, since, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, whenever you close your game, you then don't have to set your settings back to whatever you had to before, because then that just wastes time. I want to make sure that when you do set your settings, that they are saved, and then when you do exit the game and re-enter the game, that they are set back to whatever you had them set to previously. So I'm going to be creating a new function called funcSaveGame, and in the parentheses we're going to be doing save name, and then we're going to do a comma, and then we're going to do the value. So what value is this is basically, you know, whatever you have your option button selected to, or whatever you have your sliders values set to. So then we just do 2 dots and indent afterwards. And then what we do here is we do var save equals file access dot open, and then parentheses, and then you want to do quotation marks here, and then user dot dot slash slash, and then we go outside of the quote, and then we do plus save name, since this is going to be the name of our save file, and then we do plus, and then quotation marks again, and then dot. And now for this part, you can enter in whatever you want to enter. For this example, I'm going to be doing .omo, so basically you can set the file type for this to whatever you want. It's just going to be a regular text file anyway. So then once you do that, we go outside the quotes again, and then we do comma file access dot write. So basically what we're doing here is we are creating a new save file for whatever setting we are changing. So the save name is going to be the name of the save file. So for example, if we were to change the anti-aliasing setting, what would happen is the save name would be something like anti-aliasing. So then we're saving a file called anti-aliasing.omo. And if you're wondering where the save files get saved to, if you go project and then open user data folder, this is exactly where you will see your save files. So currently there isn't anything here because I haven't saved anything in this project. But yeah, so your app user data folder is where you're going to find all of your Godot project save files. So whenever we do save our save files, they're going to be saved into your app user data project folder here. So file access.write means that we are writing a new file, or writing on top of a file that already exists. You can do file access.write for files that already exist too, if you want to write over them. So then next what we do is we do save.store string. And what we're going to do is we're going to store our value that we have in our save game function as a string. So in order to do that, we're going to do str and then parentheses value, and then that will store our value as a string into our save file. And then lastly, we need to do save.close. It's important that we do that. We need to close the file afterwards, after we're done writing into it. And boom, so that there is our save game function. So what we're going to do now here in our scaling 3D function is we are going to enter in our save game function. So we're going to go save game, and then you want to enter in the save name file. So for me, it's going to be 3D scaling. Make sure you do it in quotes as well to let Godot know that it is a string. And then we can do a comma, and then you just want to do value. And boom, there we go. So the save file name, when we do save this file for the scaling 3D setting, is going to be called 3dscaling.omo. And then we're also going to be saving in the value of whatever our scaling 3D slider is set to as a string into the save file. Alright, so now let's continue on doing functions for the other settings now. So next up, let's do the master volume setting. The reason as to why I'm doing the master volume setting next is because I'm going to go down from the hierarchy here. So we're going to do func master volume, and again this will just be called value, and then we do save underscore game, and then in quotes you then do your save file name. So for me it's just going to be master volume, and then we do value here for the value, and then down beneath that we're going to do audio server. So we're going to need to access the audio server. Then we do set bus volume dB, and then you want to do the bus index. Now since we're going to be setting the master volume, what the bus index for that is going to be is 0. So we do 0 for the bus index, since that is the master volume bus index, and then we do comma, and then linear to dB. So basically what we're doing is we are basically converting a linear value to decibels, because how volume works in Godot is it's scaled by decibels. So we're going to be converting our value to what it would be in decibels, and then we just enter in value into the parentheses here, and boom. So if you wanted to do a sound effects volume or a music volume setting, what you would do is in your audio tab here, you can just go add a new bus, and then you can call it, sound effects, for example. And basically, whatever the order of your audio buses is what the bus index is going to be when you are setting that setting. So the sound effects bus here, for example, would have a bus index of 1, since master volume comes before it, so that's 0, then 1, then whatever the next bus would be 2, and then 3. So yeah, that's how the bus indexes are determined. So if you do want to add more volume related settings, that's how you would do that. Alright, so the next setting we're going to be adding is the FOV setting, since that is the next one down in the hierarchy. So for this, what we're going to actually do is we're going to create a variable. So what this is going to be a variable for is this is going to be a variable for the player's camera. Now, since I'm not going to be using my player as an example in this tutorial, what I'm doing for this tutorial actually is, as you can see here, I've got a camera 3D in my scene, which I'm going to be previewing the game through as we do end up changing the settings and stuff. So what I'm going to do for this tutorial is I'm going to grab the path to my camera 3D in this level scene. So for you guys, it would be grabbing the path to your player's camera, but for this tutorial, I'm just going to be grabbing the path to my camera 3D here in this scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do @onReadyVar, and the reason as to why I'm doing onReady is because we are setting the player variable at the start of the scene. So when the settings scene is ready, that is when the player variable will be set. So I'm going to do var player camera, or just var player cam for short, and this will equal to get_tree dot current_scene. So the current scene for me will be my level scene here, and we do get_node, and then I just need to simply do camera 3D. However, for you guys, it might be something like player/head/camera 3D, or whatever your camera's called, something like that, right? So you guys would get the path to your player's camera, but for me in this tutorial, I'm just going to be getting the path to my camera 3D I have set up in the scene. So now I'm going to go create a new function, and I'm going to call this FOV, and then I'm just going to do value in the parentheses, and then ... indent, and we'll do save game FOV in quotations, value, and then underneath that, we then do player_cam.fov equals value, just like that. Now, let's say for example, you're in a main menu or something like that, right? And you can't actually grab the path to your player because, well, there is no player in your main menu scene. Well, what you would do in that case is, you would just leave the FOV function as is, except the one change that you would do is if player_cam not equal to null. So this means that if our player camera isn't equal to nothing, so null means nothing, then what we do is we then set our player cam's FOV. So what this stops from happening is errors, because if you try to set the player's FOV when there's no player cam that's been set in the variable, then that will cause an error to happen. So what we're doing here is we're stopping any potential errors from happening by making sure that the player cam's FOV only gets set if the player cam isn't equal to nothing. So now let's do the setting for the anti-aliasing. So this is not a slider based setting, so this is going to be different to how we do that here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do func, and I'm going to call this AA, and then we just do index written in here. Now you can write value in the parentheses here if you want to as well. It doesn't matter if you enter in index or value, but I like to make sure that there's a difference between my slider settings and the option button settings, just so that I know what they are at first glance. So then we just do save game, and then in quotes AA, short for anti-aliasing, and then index here instead of value this time for the value. And then what we're going to do is we're now going to set the anti-aliasing options. So if index is to equal to 0, so as you can see here, when I select my AA option, 0 is none. So what we want to make sure of is that none of the anti-aliasing options are set, and here's how we're going to do that. So first off, we're going to do get_viewport, so we're going to grab the player's viewport, and then first off, we're going to do msaa_3d equals, and then after you do that, you'll then notice these pop-up options show up here. So what you want to make sure is that you select viewport.msaa disabled to make sure that MSAA is not being used at all. And then also what we do is get_viewport.use TAA. So TAA is temporal anti-aliasing. That's another anti-aliasing option. So you just want to make sure that this equals to false. And then we want to do get_viewport.screen_AA equals, and then again you'll notice these pop-up options show up here. You just want to select viewport.screen_AA disabled, and boom. So basically what we're doing here is we're making sure that all of Godot's anti-aliasing options are disabled if the index is set to 0, since 0 on our option button is none. So the next up is 1, so if index is to equal to 1, so what we do is else if index equal to 1, then we can just copy this, paste it underneath, and then you can keep these options here disabled, so you can keep MSAA disabled, TAA disabled, but with the AA option here, the screen space AA option here, you want to change disabled to FXAA, so then we're actually setting it to FXAA. Now I just thought of something to make this script a bit more efficient. I'm actually going to create a new function, and this is going to be called setAAOptions. And then what I'm going to do in the parentheses here is I'm going to have MSAA, TAA, and FXAA. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these options here, right? So I'm just going to get rid of these lines here, and I'm going to paste them underneath this function here. And then so what I'm going to do is instead of get_viewport MSAA 3D equals to this will just equal to MSAA, this will equal to TAA, and then this will equal to FXAA. So what we're doing here is we're basically just optimizing the script a bit and making it so then we don't have to copy these lines over and over again. We can just use like a simple function in our AA function. And basically whatever values we put into this function, that is what these options here will equal to. So if we want MSAA to be disabled, then we can do that. Same with the TAA and FXAA. And it's just going to allow us to basically just optimize the script a bit, make it more readable and stuff. So what I'm going to do here with index equals to 0 instead is I'm going to do set AA options, and then in the MSAA variant, so since if index equals to 0 means that we don't want any of these options set, for the MSAA here I'm just going to put viewport.msaa disabled, so that's what we want the MSAA to be equal to, is disabled, and then TAA we want that to be equal to false, and then FXAA we want that to be equal to viewport.screen_AA disabled, and boom. So yeah, that's how we're going to be setting those options here now through this function. It's just going to make things, you know, a bunch more better, and it just makes the script a bit shorter too. So now with else if index equals to 1, we can just copy this line here, paste it down here, and then with the screen space AA disabled line, you can just change that to FXAA just like that, and boom. And then you can just keep the other two options here false. So now we're going to go copy this again, paste it underneath, else if index equals to 2. So what 2 is equal to here in my my AA option button is TAA, so obviously we want TAA to equal to true, so I'm going to change that value here from false to true. And then we're going to be changing the FXAA option to disabled, and boom. And then the rest of these options here have to do with MSAA. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go copy this line, else if index equals to 3. Going to change this TAA value to false. and then the MSAA value will be changed to 2 times. Copy this again, paste it, else if index equals to 4, then MSAA 4 times, and then else if index equals to 5, MSAA 8 times, and boom, just like that. Alright, so next up we're going to be doing the setting for SSAO, so I'm going to go func SSAO, this will be index in the parentheses, dot dot indent. And so what we're going to be doing here, before we end up actually doing the function for this, I just remembered we need to actually create a new variable for the world environment node in our scene. So I'm going to go @onReady, since we're going to be setting this variable when the setting scene is ready. So var environment, and then I'm just going to do a type here as well, and this is going to be for the environment. So then do equals, and then I'm just going to copy this line here. So I'm going to do get_tree.current_scene.getNode. And so what I want to grab here, so I'm in my level scene right now, so as you can see in the hierarchy, we have the world environment, and what I want to grab specifically from the world environment is the environment property. So I'm going to do get_node world environment, so whatever the name of your world environment is called in your scene, that's where you would type there, and then dot environment, just like that. So now in the SSAO function, what we can do is we can do save_game, then SSAO, and then comma index, and then down here we can do environment dot SSAO enabled equals, and since this is going to be between 0 and 1, one fun fact that you might not know about Godot, and other engines probably work like this too, depending on the programming language, but you can actually have true or false values be equal to integers, so 0 or 1. So 0 would equal to false, 1 would equal to true. So what we can actually do here with SSAO enabled is we can just make this equal to index. If I'm correct based on my previous experience with this, this should just, equal to false or true. So SSAO enabled will equal to false or true depending on what index is equal to. So now we're going to be doing a setting for the SDFGI, so we're going to do func SDFGI index, then save_game, SDFGI, and then index, and then we do environment, so we're grabbing the environment again, then we do dot SDFGI enabled equals to index, since if index equals to 0 or 1, that will mean true or false. And then we do SSIL, so func SSIL. It's pretty much just sort of the same thing with all these environment options here. SSIL for the save file name, index for the value, environment.ssil enabled will then equal to index. I think to save time for the next function, I'm just going to copy this SSIL function, paste it down here, change the name of the function to volumetric fog, since we're going to be doing the volumetric fog setting now. And then just enter volumetric fog into here. And then with this SSIL enabled, we can just replace that with volumetric fog enabled, just like that. And then it will equal to index. And then we just have 2 more environment related settings left. Just going to copy this volumetric fog one, paste it. This will be for the color adjustments for the save file name, and then we can just do adjustment enabled equals to index. And then lastly, for the environment related settings, we're going to do func glow. So this is for that bloom like related setting, so save game glow, and then environment.glow enabled equals to index, and boom, just like that. So yeah, I've got a lot of settings done already so far, and now we're going to be doing the vsync related setting. So for this, what we're going to do, func vsync index, save game, vsync index, and then we do display server, so we need to get access to display server. Then we do vsync, or Windows set vsync mode, and then in the parentheses here, we want to set the vsync mode. So since this is going to be for if index is equal to 0, we want to do vsync disabled at first, which reminds me I forgot to do a if index equals to 0 here. And then we can just copy this line and then just paste it underneath. Else if index equals to 1, then vsync will be enabled. And boom, just like that. So then we're going to do the window mode. So we're going to do func window mode index save underscore game window mode index, and then display server. So we're going to get this display server again, then window set mode. Also, I forgot to do a if index equals to 0 again. So basically, if index equals to 0, we want our window mode to be set to windowed. So what we're going to do in the parentheses here is window mode windowed. Then we copy this line, and then else if index equals to 1. So what we want to do here is we want this to be full screen, so we just change the windowed to full screen in all caps, just like that. And then the last option is exclusive full screen, so we'll just copy that, paste it here, change that to 2, and then we just do exclusive out the front here, just like that. So next up is going to be the FPS cap option, so we'll do func FPS cap index save underscore game FPS index, and then if index equals to 0, then what we do here is we do engine.max FPS equals to 30. So if index equals to 0, and because the first option on my FPS cap is 30 FPS, I'm going to be setting the max FPS to 30. So yeah, it's very easy to set the max FPS in a Godot game. It's literally just engine.maxFPS equals. So then we'll just copy this line, then else if index equals to 1. Because the next option here I have is 60 FPS, the max FPS will be set to 60 if index equals to 1. Paste that down here. Then since uncapped is the last option, max FPS will equal to 0. So if you ever want to make sure that the FPS of your game is not capped, you can set max FPS to 0. Alright, so the final setting we're going to be adding in is for the shadow quality. So let's go func shadow quality, and we'll do index in the parentheses and then indent save underscore game, and we're going to call the save file shadow quality, and then of course we want the value to be the index. Alright, so here's what we're going to do with this. So we're going to do if index equals to 0, so then we do rendering server dot set, directional soft shadow filter set quality, and then inside the parentheses here, since if index equals to 0, we want our shadow quality to be set to hard. Inside of the parentheses here, we're going to set the shadow quality to hard. And then we're going to do the same thing again underneath, rendering server dot, but this time instead of directional, we're going to do positional, soft shadow filter set quality. And then of course we want to do the quality hard option again, so I'm just going to copy that, paste that in there, and boom, there we go. In fact, I've actually just decided I'm going to do a very similar thing to what I did with the AA options. So I'm actually going to create a new function, and we're just going to call this set shadows. And then in here we're going to have the directional and the positional values. And then we're just going to copy these here, paste them here. And then we'll change this here to directional, so then this will equal to whatever we put into the directional value. And then same thing here for the positional one as well. So now what we can do here is we can do set underscore shadows under if index equals to 0. And then for the directional and positional variants, we can just do rendering server dot shadow quality hard, just like that. And then we can do a comma, and then we can copy this and then paste it for the positional one as well, and there we go. So basically what we're doing is, if index equals to 0, we're going to be setting the directional and positional shadow filter qualities to hard, which is the lowest quality. Now the reason as to why we set the directional and positional is because directional, as I mentioned earlier, refers to the sunlight, so that refers to directional lights in Godot. And then positional, that refers to omni lights, spotlights, so other kinds of lights which aren't sunlight. So basically we need to set the quality for both the sunlight and other regular lights too when it comes to their shadows. So then we can just copy this here. In fact, I just realized we don't even need to do 2. Hold on guys, sorry that I'm changing up things here. Let's actually just change this name to shadow quality. And then we'll just copy this and then paste it in here because they're going to be set to the same thing anyway, so we don't even need to paste it twice. So down here in this function now, under if index equals 0, we can just get rid of one of those, so then we just have, it just written like this, so then this same thing applies to both of them, if you get what I mean. So now let's copy this line, paste it underneath, so else if index equals to 1. So as you can see in my shadow quality option button, for the second option we have soft very low. So down here now where it says quality hard, we're going to change this to soft very low, just like that. Then we're going to paste again, else if index equals to 2, then it's going to equal to soft low, so we just get rid of hard, then put soft low, and then of course once again, else if index equals to 3, then this will be soft medium, and then we do soft high and soft ultra. So this here is soft high, and then we have soft ultra. And boom, just like that. So now we set the shadow quality. Alright, so now that we've created our functions, we can now actually connect them up to our sliders and our option buttons in our hierarchy. So for example, if I was to select my scaling slider in the hierarchy here, and then as you can see it opens up the scaling sliders inspector menu, well if we change from the inspector tab over to the node tab, as you can see we can now see our signals for our slider. So where it says value changed, you want to double click on this, and now we're going to be connecting up this signal here, the value changed signal, to our scaling 3D function. So basically whenever we change the slider's value, this signal here, the value changed signal, will be called, and then that will call our scaling 3D function. So what I'm going to do is in the receiver method here on this new window that's popped up, I'm going to enter in scaling 3D. Go connect, and then you'll know that your function has been properly connected when you see this green little icon here appear to the left of your function. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the master volume. I'm going to select the slider here, double click on value changed, make sure I have my settings parent node selected since that's where my function is. Then I'm going to type in master volume, connect, and then it connects up this function. And so I'm going to do this with all of my my sliders and option buttons now. So next up is the FOV. So now we just type in FOV, connect, and boom, just like that. So now with the option buttons, what we do here, so select one of your option buttons, and then there is no value changed signal here. What you need to do instead is you need to do item selected. So when we do select an item from the option button list, it will then call our needed function. So for this, we're going to double click on item selected, make sure we have our settings parent node selected, and then I'm going to enter in AA since this is for the AA button, the anti-aliasing option. Then we go connect, and then it connects up our anti-aliasing option just like that. So then we have SSAO, same thing again, double click on item selected, SSAO, go connect, and boom, just like that. And then we'll do the same thing with everything else. So SDFGI now, then SSIL, volumetric fog. So yeah, it should be quick for you guys now that you know how to connect up all the signals and stuff. And then we got our VSync, and then the window mode, then the FPS cap, and then last but not least is the shadow quality. And boom, just like that, now all our functions are connected up to their correct buttons. And sliders, of course. So now our settings menu should pretty much work. So if we were to test out the settings menu right now in our main game scene, everything should work as is. However, if we were to leave the game, then load back into it, our settings would be reset, because even though we do save our settings, we don't load them back in. So here's how we're going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function, and this will be called load slider. And for the parentheses here, we're going to be doing save name, and then you want to also do the slider as well. So we want to have a variable for the save name of our save file, and then also the exact slider that we do want to apply the changes to, apply the save to, I mean. So then we go indent. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this here. I'm just going to copy this line of code, paste it underneath. But instead of file access.write, what we're going to be doing for this load slider function is file access.read. So the reason as to why we do file access.read is because we are reading the file instead of writing on it. So we're not going to be storing any new information into this file, we're going to check if the file exists. So once we check if the file exists, we can go if save and then indent. So what we're doing here is we're checking if the save file exists, and if it does exist, what we want to do is we want to do slider.value equals, so what we're doing is we're grabbing our slider that we apply into this function, and then we're going to set the value of it to the saved value. So for this we need to convert our string from the file into a float, so we do float and then parentheses save.getAsText, so we're getting the text from the save file. And then now what that should do is apply our save file's value to the slider value. And then after we do that, we do save.close to close the save file since we no longer need it, and boom, just like that. So now we're going to be doing a very similar thing, but this time it's for the option buttons. So we're going to do func load options, and then we can do save name again, and then this time we can do button and then indent. So we're just going to copy this line of code again, just like that, paste it there. If save, we're checking if the save file exists. And then this time, instead of doing slider.value, we're going to do button.selected, since we're changing the selected value of the option buttons. And then we do int, so we need to convert our save file text to an integer. And then we do save.getAsText. And just like that, we now set our option button selected value. And then we do save.close, and boom, just like that. So now that we have our load functions in, let's actually create a ready function now, so then whenever we do load back into our scene, our saved settings will then be loaded in and correctly applied. So let's go func_ready. So this is our ready function. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to start off by entering load slider. So we're going to start off with our load slider function. And then for the save name, you want to enter in the save name of any of your slider save names. So for example, with the 3D scaling option, the 3D scaling save name for me is just 3D scaling. So in the load slider option here, I'm going to be doing 3D scaling, and then comma, and then we're going to be doing $, and the $, what that does is that allows us to grab a child node of our settings parent node, since our script is attached to the settings. And then we can do scaling to grab our scaling slider, just like that. And then we're going to repeat this another 2 times, since I do have 2 more sliders that we need to apply settings to. So basically what we're doing in our ready function is we're just loading in each of our sliders and option button settings that we do have saved. So I'm just going to paste this 2 more times, and then I'm going to change 3D scaling in this second one to master volume, since we want to load in our master volume saved settings, and then we want to do $ master volume to grab the master volume slider, and then FOV, same thing there, and then $FOV to grab the FOV slider. And then now we need to load in our option button settings, so obviously there's a lot more of them. We only have 3 slider based settings, but we have a bunch more option button ones, so let's do them. So then we do load_options. And the first one I'm going to do is for the anti-aliasing, so the save name for that is AA, so I'm going to enter in that in here, and do comma, and then we're going to grab our AA button, just like that. So then I'm going to copy this, paste it underneath, and then instead of AA, this time I'm going to be loading in the SSAO settings, and then we want to apply that to the SSAO button. Paste again, then this one will be for SDFGI, and we want to apply that to the SDFGI button. And then SSIL, we want to apply that to the SSIL button. Then we have volumetric fog, and then we want to grab our volumetric fog button. And then load options, color adjustments, glow, VSync. Then we got to do the window mode. Just got 2 more to enter in now. So yeah, reminder, what we're doing here in this ready function currently is all these functions here, so the load sliders and the load options functions, they're basically applying our saved settings from our previous game session onto our sliders and option buttons, so then they are set to what they were beforehand before we ended up leaving the game. Now, one thing to mention as well is if you are loading your game for the first time, basically when we do call the load slider function in the ready setting, for example, in the ready function, for example, what will happen is because we don't have a save file yet, this if save, the code underneath the if save section here won't actually be called. So we're not going to have any settings applied, everything's just going to be set to their defaults. So now lastly, we do load options, shadow quality, and boom, just like that. Alright, so we're not done here with our ready function yet. I know that was, a bit of work there getting all this in. But now what we need to do is we need to actually call our proper functions that we use to set the settings in order to make sure that the correct settings are actually applied now. So our sliders and our option buttons now have their correct values applied, but we need to now use those corrected values to now set our settings to what they actually need to be. So now we're going to call each of these functions here. So we're going to be calling our scaling 3D function, the master volume function, basically all of these functions here that we use to set our settings. We're going to be calling them now in our ready function underneath the load section here. So these load functions, they basically apply our values to the option buttons and sliders, but then our actual settings functions here actually apply the proper settings that need to be applied from those values. So we're going to do scaling 3D, and then for the value here, you want to put in your scaling.value, just like that. So for example, if it's a slider, you want to do, your slider names.value, since you want to grab the value from that and apply it to that function. So then we do master volume, and then I'm going to grab my master volume slider, and then .value, since we want the value from the slider there. And then we're going to do the same thing for the FOV. Grab the FOV slider.value, and then we want to call AA, grab the AA selected button, then do .selected since we want to use the selected value to apply our setting there. SSAO, again same thing here, SSAO.selected, and now I'm just going to rinse and repeat with all these other functions here. Hopefully you guys understand what I'm doing. Alright, almost done, just got to do a few more now. Now we're setting the window mode. Got to grab the window mode button, then grab the selected value, and boom, just like that. So now our ready function is completed. So now that should be our settings menu done, hopefully. Hopefully that is all the scripting done. Now that's all that's left for us to do is to test it out, and if I've forgotten anything, of course I can add it in later. So now in my level scene here, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to click on this icon here in order to instantiate a child scene, and I'm just going to add my settings menu in, just like that. And boom, now we have our settings menu in. So another thing to mention before we do continue on with the testing is that, so I know that a lot of you guys with your settings menus, you're probably going to want to make sure that your player can actually change their settings whilst the game is paused. Now, one thing to mention is that if you don't have the process mode of your settings menu set to always, your settings menu won't work at all, because if your game is paused, right, and you just have the process mode set to the regular inherit option, that will actually make sure that your settings menu will stay paused. So you need to make sure that it's set to always to make sure that your settings menu works whilst your game is paused. So that is just a quick thing to mention there. If you want to use your settings menu whilst the game's paused, make sure you set your process mode to always. Before testing also, something else which I did, so then when we do change the glow setting, it's more obvious. What I decided to do was I decided to change the blend mode to screen, since that's more noticeable, and I also turned up the bloom a bit as well, so when we do enable and disable the glow setting, it is a bit more apparent. But anyways, without further ado, let's now get started and test. So I'm going to click on the clipboard up here in order to test my current scene, and here we are. So first off, let's play around with this scaling 3D setting here. Now as you can see, I've actually already been playing around with some of the settings since I was testing things out before. So certain settings that were set to on are now off, and I've even got the anti-aliasing set. So if I change the anti-aliasing here, as you can see, I'll probably have to zoom in so you guys can see more properly, but when I change the anti-aliasing setting, you can actually see the jagged edges becoming more smoother on the rectangles, just like that. And then we can change the volumetric fog, We can set the color adjustments, so I've got a bit of a yellow filter on for the color adjustments. You can probably see that changing a bit. We can set the shadow filter quality. So I don't know if you guys can tell really all that well, but the shadow quality is changing. I might have to zoom in on the shadows in the distance there so you guys can see that. And then the SSAO, as you can see when we change the SSAO, it toggles it. SDFGI, so that gets applied and unapplied whenever we toggle that. Same thing with the glow. The 3D scaling. So yeah, everything all works just as is, and then I assume the FPS cap works as well. Can't really test that out right now due to the fact that we're stationary here, but I assume that works. And then we have our FOV, which we can change here too. Oh, and yeah, no, the 30 FPS is set because I can tell that this is capped at 30 FPS right now. If I uncap it, and yeah, that's a lot more smoother now. I mean, I'm recording this video at 30 FPS anyway, so you guys wouldn't be able to tell, but yeah. So anyways, that's the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully the settings video did help you out. Now you're probably wondering to yourself, but wait, how do I close my settings menu? And the answer to that is, well, I'm going to allow you guys to do that yourselves. If you want to apply this settings menu to a pause menu or a main menu, you guys can do that yourselves. I want to give you that challenge. What I do recommend is that you do add a new button into your settings scene, so you could have like a button in like the top right of your settings menu, like an X or something, and then you could add code to make sure that whenever you do press that button, it closes your settings menu and then opens back up to your main menu or your pause menu, something like that. So yeah, but anyways guys, thank you all for watching. Hopefully this did all help you out with making your first settings menu in Godot. It is a bit more of an advanced settings menu. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.